Good morning, boys and girls. How are you doing today? My name is Craig Sipes, and I am the STEAM coordinator for the Los Angeles Unified School District's Local District East, and I'm very happy to be here with you today for our virtual field trip with NASA JPL, where we are going to be exploring the question of what do they do at JPL? What does JPL even mean? What does NASA mean? And what is an engineer? Today, we've got Lyle Tavernier here, and Lyle is going to talk to us about all of these things, and you're going to have an opportunity to send in questions through the Google form that the teachers have the link to. So we will hope to see your questions very soon. Lyle, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be with you today. Thank you so much. My name is Lyle, and I'm excited to talk to you about NASA and where I work, JPL, and what an engineer is. So if you look on the screen, you might see our NASA logo, and I bet some of you have seen that before. It's actually a very popular logo. I have it on my shirt here, and I have two more shirts in my bedroom that also have this logo. And I bet if you look around when you're outside, you'll probably see some people with it on their shirts or maybe on their hats. And we do a lot of different things at NASA, but one thing that most people know us for is sending astronauts into space. So if you want to be an astronaut, NASA is the place to work. But NASA is a very big place. There are different parts of NASA, and we do different things at these different parts of NASA. The part I work at is called JPL. Those letters J, P, and L, they stand for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And so you can kind of hear the J sound and the P sound and the L sound in those words. And one job that a lot of people have at JPL is an engineer. And I want to show you a picture of some engineers. And as you can see, engineers are people just like you and me. And I like this picture because it shows a lot of different types of people who are engineers. I've got my friend Jim here in the back. I don't know if you can see my mouse wiggling, but this is my friend Jim back here. He's been an engineer for a long time, so he's a little bit of an older guy. And then my friend Mallory over here, she's been an engineer for a shorter time, so she's a younger woman. But we've got this whole range of people who are engineers. Now, you might be asking yourself this important question. What is an engineer? Well, engineers do a lot of different things, but an engineer is a person who solves problems. And you might be thinking, well, I like to solve problems. Maybe I could be an engineer. Well, very possible. So an engineer is a person who solves problems by doing certain things. Usually, an engineer will solve problems by building a new object. So maybe an engineer would build maybe a building or a bridge or a road, or maybe something smaller. Maybe an engineer would build a bike or even a couch like what I'm sitting on, or chairs that you could be sitting on. Some engineers even build robots. Sometimes engineers don't build new things, but they take things that already exist and they make them better. So maybe you've used something before and you thought, this doesn't work very good. How could I make it better? Or how could it be better? And if you've thought like that, you might be thinking like an engineer. And so an example might be a hammer. I have a hammer, and it's really, really good at hammering small nails. I can tap it very lightly, and it does a really good job. But I need a bigger, better hammer if I have a really big nail that I want to hammer into. So an engineer might take something that is already there, like a hammer, and make a better hammer, a hammer that's better for the job that they need. Another great example are cups. You might not think about cups as being something that needs a lot of improvement, but there are so many different kinds of cups. And if I just think about a plastic cup that might hold my water, well, that's pretty good for holding water. But what if I have like a hot drink like hot chocolate or hot tea, that might not be very good because it might burn my hands. Or what if I'm not very good at holding a cup? Think about when you were really, really little and you maybe weren't very good at holding cups and you spilled a lot. Babies have cups with special lids that an engineer designed so that they could drink a little bit better. Now, I want to show you some pictures because when I look at this picture, this, by the way, is a picture of where I work. This is a building and an intersection at JPL. And when I look at this picture, I see lots and lots of things that an engineer had to build or think about how to build. So when you look at this picture, you might be thinking of some different things that an engineer had to build. So think for a moment about what you see. There's a building. Somebody had to build the building. They had to come up with what it would look like and how big it would be. There are some street lights. There are roads. There are crosswalks. These are all different things that engineers had to build. When I look at this picture, an engineer probably saw a big space between two pieces of land and they thought, well, there's a problem. We want to get from one side of this land to the other and cross the water. How can we do that? Well, let's design and build a bridge. So you can see this bridge at the bottom of the picture. But if you look up at the top of the picture, you can see that there are two vehicles in the air, actually. There is one airplane and one spaceship. And the spaceship is actually riding piggyback on top of the airplane. The spaceship was designed because we had a problem. We wanted to go to space, but we can't just go out into space. We need a special vehicle. And you're actually looking at another engineering design where they said, well, we have another problem. We have to get this spaceship around when it's here on Earth. So we'll put it on top of the airplane. Now, another thing, as I mentioned, that engineers build are robots. This is my friend Farah, and she is an engineer, and she helped to build this robot that you see. This is a rover that is driving around on Mars now, and engineers had to figure out how to build that and what to do with it. And Farah was one of those engineers who did that. So what I want to do is I want to now give you a moment to take or to talk with your class about what you've learned, what an engineer is, and think about any questions that you might have. And I know, Craig, you have some additional information to share about how to get those questions to me. So think about an engineer and any questions you might have.
Thank you, Lyle, so much for that. Classes, we're going to give you 2 minutes to have a classroom discussion. And then towards the end of that 2 minutes, if you could bring up that Google form, the Q&A Google form, and send us the questions, then we would love to take the questions from the students. The students think of some really good questions about what engineers are, what they do, and all the different things that can be engineered. And let us know what you're thinking. So we'll be back in 2 minutes. All right, we've got lots of good questions coming in from Mariana and Rowan. Teachers, go ahead and send in your questions. You have about 20 more seconds. All right. So, Lyle, we have a question here from Maximiliano in Ms. Moreles's class at Mariana, and he's asking, why do you cover yourself up when you're building rovers at JPL?
Maximiliano, that is an excellent question. So you can see in this picture, Farah has what we call a smock on, and it does a couple of different things. It protects the rover from electricity. And you might think, well, why do we need to protect the rover from electricity? Well, there are a lot of computers on the rover, and we don't want any sparks to build up. You know how sometimes, especially in the winter when it's really cold and dry, you might rub your feet on the carpet or shuffle your feet around. And if you touch something, you might get a little shock. We don't want that to happen to the rover because it can damage it. So that smock actually helps protect the rover. And when we're building it, Farah would actually have on a mask over her face and covering her hair and longer pants on. And that's because we also need to make sure that things like our hair, or if we have any like grease on our fingers or anything like that, Farah would be wearing rubber gloves too to protect the rover from getting dirty. We want to send a very clean rover to Mars, not a very dirty one. Great question. I wish I had a picture of Farah all covered up, but I don't have one.
Thank you. And Leah's asking, Leah from Mariana is asking, how do engineers show people what space looks like? How do you take pictures in space?
Well, we do it just like we would here on Earth using a camera. The rover itself has, I think, 17 different cameras. We actually have 2 rovers driving around on Mars, but they each have lots and lots of cameras. The trick is once we take the picture in space or on another planet, we have to send it back. And so we need very, very big antennas so that when we send the signal with the picture in it, we can capture that from really far away. So we use cameras just like we would here on Earth. It just takes a little longer to get them because we have to send them from really far away all the way back to Earth.
Let's take one more question for now, and then we'll move on. This last question here in this segment is from actually about three different people are asking the same question. It's a popular question. So from Mrs. Moreles's class at Mariana, from Rowan and Bernadette from Miss Arciba's class at Ford, they're asking, how does a person become an engineer?
Ooh, that is a really good question. And I'm glad so many of you are asking that. Well, like I said, an engineer is a job, but it's also a way of thinking. So you can be an engineer as a kindergartner. If you see something that needs improvement, or if you see a problem and you think you could build something to solve that problem, you're an engineer. But if you want to have a job as an engineer, you can actually go to college to study to be an engineer. And there are lots of schools that will teach you how to be an engineer when you're in college. And to get ready for that, you can study math and you can study science. And you can even play with toy robots and build your own toy robots as a kid. As you get into older grades, those are things you'll start to learn about. So in elementary school and middle school, as you get older, and in high school, you'll start learning about some of those things that will help to get you ready. Great question.
Yeah, thank you. We'll give you some more time for some questions later on. Thank you for sending those, and continue to please send some more to us.
All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about engineering because you all had great questions, and asking questions is something that engineers do. They ask questions like who, what, where, why, and how. Those 5 question words are very important. You need to know who is going to use the thing that you're building. What is it going to do? Where is it going to do the thing that you want it to do? When is it going to do those things? Why? That's a good question too. If you don't know why you're building it, there's no sense in building it. And then how? How will you build it? Those are all important questions that engineers have to ask. They also make observations. So if you think about the 5 senses, our sense of sight, our sense of smell, our sense of hearing, our sense of touch, and our sense of taste, engineers have to use a lot of those senses when they're building. They usually don't use their sense of taste because we don't want to lick the road or anything like that, but we do have to listen to what things sound like when we build them. We want to make sure that they don't make really loud, terrible sounds that nobody wants to hear. We have to look at them to make sure that they are working the way that they are supposed to. Sometimes when you engineer something, you want it to look really pretty. And sometimes you don't, but you need your sense of sight for that. So we use our 5 different senses to get information or think about all of these different things when we're building something new, and we can kind of imagine what it might look like. We can use our brains to put a picture in our head. But once we do that, we need to get that picture out of our head and onto some paper. And so one thing that engineers do is they draw. And you can see here on the picture a pretty simple drawing with some paper and pencil. This is someone designing a way to safely land something when it falls. And so you can do a very simple drawing. Think about whether or not you like to draw, and maybe these are some things that you could do as an engineer. Sometimes we have much fancier drawings. So you can see this is the drawing of the robot that Farah was standing next to. So before it was a robot, it was in someone's head, and then it became a drawing on paper. So it takes a lot of thinking and work to get those things built. Now, once we do that, then we have to actually build it. And when we're building things, we want to think about how the shape of something will help us solve the problem. So in this case, when we're building that lander, we're using cardboard of different shapes, and we've got some straws, and we've got some even marshmallows and rubber bands. It's funny because we see robots and we think, well, engineers need fancy stuff. You can be an engineer with paper and cardboard, rubber bands, marshmallows, anything that you have, if you can think about how to use those things. So we do a lot of thinking before we even start to build. And that's an important part of being an engineer. Now, when we build things, then we do some additional tests. So here we think about how we might test out our lander, and we even draw out how we're going to test it. We're going to see how will it work. We want to make sure that what we're building is going to do what we thought it would do. We can even make predictions. We can say, well, I think that it's going to work very well. Or you might think, well, I don't think it's going to work well, but I want to see how it works so that I can then figure out how to make it better. Because sometimes we build things and they don't always work as we think they will. And sometimes we don't know how they're going to work, so we just need to try it. Here is a great example of our lander. We were trying to land a marble on a target, and we had 3 different tests. And you can see none of them really hit the middle of the target, so we have to come up with a better idea. And that's okay. That's one of the things that engineers do, is they figure out how things work and how to make them better. So what I would like to do now is take another break for some questions. And I'll give you another 2 minutes to think about questions about engineers. And maybe I'll go back to another picture of maybe someone building something. So that might help while you're thinking about your questions.
Great. So 2 more minutes, and we'll be back with your questions. Send your questions in on the Google form, and we will take the questions. Okay, classes, you have about 20 more seconds left. So teachers, go ahead and start sending in your questions. All right, so Michaela from Miss Fung's class at Rowan is asking or is saying that Michaela is building a launcher. And actually, a lot of our students are building launchers. They are pinball engineers. They are designing and building pinball machines. And so Michaela is asking, have you ever built something like that when you were a kid?
That's exciting. I think that's really neat that you're building the pinball launcher. I don't think I've ever built a pinball launcher, but I do remember building a car launcher. I had a little toy car about this big, and I would build little roads for it to drive on, and I built a little launcher so that I didn't have to push it. I could just put it in my launcher and make the car go. So you can use some of the same ideas from building a car launcher to building a pinball launcher. So maybe I'll think about my building a pinball launcher.
Thank you. Room 39 from Rowan is asking, do you like your job?
Oh, I love my job. I think it is such a neat place to work. And it's such a neat place to work because of the people who work there. They're people who think about things that nobody has ever done, and then they try to figure out how they can do it. And that's just a neat place to be.
And Celia from Mariana is making a comment then asking a question. So she says they should throw the ball hard, but not too hard. I think maybe in reference to the targeting. But I think that was not throwing, right? It was something different.
Yeah, we on this one we were actually dropping it from a machine we built, and we were trying to get it. But you're right. We don't want to throw it too hard, otherwise we won't be able to get our target.
And then the follow-up question that she asked for that is, how many times do they test it?
Oh, many, many times. So for this rover that we sent to Mars, we tested it thousands of times in thousands of different ways. We had to test to make sure the wheels turned. We had to make sure it has an arm. We had to make sure that the arm could move. All those cameras we had to test to make sure the cameras worked. Everything on that rover we had to test thousands of times because once it goes to Mars, we can't go fix it. We have to make sure that it works once we send it. So thousands and thousands of tests.
And we've saved the final question here to be about robots. So Mr. Ayala's class for Mariana is asking, how can they build that robot? And we understand that engineers make things better and make new things, but how can you build a robot?
Well, you build a robot, like you see the drawing here. This drawing shows all the different parts of the robot. And so we take every single part that needs to make this robot, and we actually will cut it out of metal. So we'll start with big pieces of metal and we'll cut pieces out and we'll put those pieces together using screws and bolts. Sometimes we even use a little bit of tape to hold pieces together. But all of those pieces we cut and we make the individual pieces and then put them together to make a robot. So it takes thousands of people working on these projects for a very, very long time to make these robots. But in the end, we all work together to build something really, really special.
So it's really good practice to make things out of cardboard and paper just to get used to using materials. Is that right?
Absolutely. So when you are building your pinball launchers, think about using cardboard. We do the same thing, but with metal.
Well, that is all the time that we have today, but we want to thank you so much, Lyle, for taking this time out of your very busy schedule to be here with us today. We really appreciate it, and we want to say thank you. Boys and girls, thank you also for being here with us today. We're so happy to be here with you, and we will see you next time. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, live stream has ended.